Hey everyone, before we get into today's episode, just want to let you guys know we have a new series coming. It's going to be every Thursday, and this series is for you. It's for our community. It's to give you guys a chance to write into us to let us know what are situations that you're going through that you want us to work with? Because Life Unpotted is all about questioning our reality. It's about questioning the experiences that we're having to kind of discover the truth of what's really going on. What is really happening? Why am I really not happy here? What am I resisting? What is a perspective that I can find that will help me understand the situation better? So we want you guys to email us at info@livelifeunpotted.com. or send us a voice message. You can do that by going to Spotify, scroll to the bottom of the show notes. It'll give you an option to send in a message via Anchor. We want to hear from you. It can be completely anonymous, or you can give us your name, whatever you guys want. But Thursday episodes are for you. And what we'll do is read your message or play it on the episode. And then we're going to work through it, try to understand what is it you're going through and what are some insights and perspectives that we can gain.
So we're really excited for this series. We have been wanting to do a second episode each week for a very long time. And we've been wanting to include the community more. So we've decided to bridge those two things together, bring you guys into it, because we want to understand really what's happening in your lives. We know there are things happening in your lives. That's why you listen to this podcast. So we want to better attune really what we talk about based off of what you're experiencing in real time, so we can help you get to the next place and to the next step and the next step. We're really excited for that. That's why each week we're going to dedicate a second episode to your questions entirely. So like Sophie said, email them to us at info@livelifeunpotted.com. Or if you want to share your voice and have others hear your voice, go down to Spotify and scroll down to the bottom and send a voice note in, and we'll play that live and we'll give our 2 cents. We'll work through the problem as if it were our own, and you'll help yourself, we'll help you, and you'll help others. So it sounds like a win-win-win for everyone, and a really fun way just to get everyone involved. Don't be intimidated to be the first one to send in what you're going through. It can be as simple as something that's happening in your life, simple as a statement. It can really be anything. There's no constraints on what it can and cannot be. We more so just want to hear from you, and we want to talk directly to you.
Yeah.
So nothing too small, nothing too big. Send it over to us, and we'll use it food for thought to create more content for you all. And like I said, don't be intimidated to do this. It can be anonymous if that's what you would prefer to get started with. And seriously, we're talking to you. So if this could be a great time for you to reflect on what are you going through. Take a moment. Say, what could I work on? And what you come up with, just shoot us a note. It doesn't have to be anything in particular.
Yeah, and I think this can be literally like, oh, what do you guys think about when you die? Or I feel like I keep getting really frustrated every time I have to wake up early. So it can anything. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for this series and excited to hear from you guys.
We can't wait to read our messages from you all. Enjoy the episode today.
Hey, and welcome back to Life Unpotted. Let me tell you, we are feeling a lot different this week than we were last week. This just kind of shows the whole reason to stick through when you're not feeling your best, because we are feeling so much more grounded, so much more relaxed into the process. And I think that's kind of what the vibe of this episode is going to be, is just relaxing and trusting, and the importance of not clinging to those thoughts when they make you think otherwise. So I'm excited. I'm feeling really good today. We got our Life Unpotted shirts on, which makes me feel even more excited.
Yep, we're feeling very refreshed, very in touch with ourselves, and that always makes for a really good episode. So excited to be recording today. And it's also early-ish in the morning. So
we usually don't record this early. It's 11
don't.
a.m. on a Sunday. We have a potluck tonight we're going to. Mexican themed. So got a busy day ahead, so we figured we'd get the podcast out in the morning. So I've been reading this book by, I think it's pronounced Neville Goddard. He was a big philosopher from like the 1950s, and I absolutely love everything he talks about in this book. He really talks about like changing our reality, changing our consciousness, and how we need to change our thoughts to do that. So I wanted to just read a little excerpt from the book, and then we could chat about it. To be transformed, the whole basis of your thoughts must change. But your thoughts cannot change unless you have new ideas, for you think from your ideas. Old transformation begins with an intense, burning desire to be transformed. The first step in the renewing of the mind is desire. You must want to be different before you can begin to change yourself. Then you must make your future dream a present fact. You do this by assuming the feeling of your wish fulfilled. By desiring to be other than what you are, you can create an ideal of the person you want to be and assume that you are already that person. If this assumption is persisted in until it becomes your dominant feeling, then attainment of your ideal is inevitable.
So I think there was one thing that was maybe straightforward from that passage, that was, in order to change, you have to first have the desire to change. And I think it's interesting because when we go through the steps of wanting to change, we think everything that we want is in the future. We think, oh, once I get that, or once I change this about myself, then I'll start to see some change. But if you were to read further from this book, he goes on to say, really the only currency that matters is change itself, because when you are making changes, the future is happening now. So I think that we've been misled through the idea of change, that everything is going to be in the future that we start to feel different about. But I think we have to start feeling different right now in order to change our future.
And I think that's a really confusing thing to understand, because I think it's like, so he really goes to talk about like, okay, our reality right now, and I was having a lot of thoughts about this yesterday, is like your entire reality is based off of your mind and your consciousness. So if you're going to look around wherever you are right now, the only way you're actually perceiving what you're perceiving is through your awareness. Like, we often think that certain parts of our life are separate. I think this can be really hard to understand because we look at situations outside of ourselves and we think there's something going on in life that isn't just us. I think that can be really confusing to understand. Let me just read another part from the book. Man's chief delusion is his conviction that there are causes other than his own state of consciousness. All that befalls a man, all that is done by him, all that comes from him, happens as a result of his state of consciousness. A man's consciousness is all that he thinks and desires and loves, all that he believes is true and consents to. That is why a change of your consciousness is necessary before you can change your outer world. Also, LOL, if they always use the term man. You could tell it was written back in the mid-90s or late 90s. It's like a man. There was some reference. It was like, just like a woman befalls to love. I was like, well, yeah, you could tell when this is written.
Nonetheless, some really good tidbits of wisdom in there.
Yeah, because I think it's what it's really saying is that we think when you are looking out into the world, like it's easy to think that there's you and then there's everything else. But think about when you close your eyes, right? So the listener right now, if you can close your eyes, whatever you're doing, you close your eyes and you see just darkness. There's nothing actually that you can physically experience beyond your senses of sound and sight. So then you open your eyes back up and the world rushes into you. You see the things around you, see the colors of the trees, or you see the people walking on the street. That sight that you're having is a result of and only your consciousness. So that consciousness is not separate from, so if you see somebody walking on the street next to you, that event is not separate from your consciousness. That event is happening in your consciousness. If you were not alive, you would not be perceiving that. So is this making sense?
So is what you're saying that if I was walking on the street and I saw you walking on the street, there's really no separation between the two of us other than just the idea that I've created from my perspective?
More so the way that so if I'm walking the street and you see me walking the street, the way that you're perceiving me is entirely created by your mind. So there have been a subset of experiences that you've had your whole life, right? So you're born and we go through all these different experiences that we have throughout life. And I think it's easy to forget a lot of the times that like the way our minds operate are based off of years and years and years and years of our life, of learned behavior, of learned thought patterns. So when I see somebody walking on the street, my brain, and we've been listening to a lot of Joe Dispenza, and he talks a lot about how the synapses being fired in your brain are programmed through years and years and years for you to perceive that situation.
Right. A helpful way to think about it is think of when you're waking up in the morning and think about, I mean, I don't know about you, but it's so easy. Your mind is so malleable. Like you can have a lot of thoughts. And you could easily start thinking about something that you don't want to be thinking about. But you have the most power, I think, in the mornings, perceived power in the mornings, to look at yourself and be like, today's going to be a good day. And it's easier to shift. You can sit with your thoughts, you can be a little bit quiet for a minute, and it's easier to recognize that you have the power of how you want to start your day. And I think you can continue that throughout your entire day of saying, oh, these are the patterns that I've always thought that have made me miserable, that have made me unhappy, that have created this life that I don't want. So I'm just going to become aware of those thoughts and I'm going to sit through the discomfort of saying I'm going to change them.
Yeah. And I think what happens is you start to have this awareness to realize that like every single thing that's happening in your life is a result of the way that you're perceiving the world. So two people walking down the street, right? Like Hector says, right? You're on the subway. all of a sudden the subway stops. You have one person sitting there. They start to get really anxious. They start to get really frustrated. The other person sitting there has their music on, is jamming, feeling real relaxed. It's not the subway. It's not that external event. It's never ever, there is no such thing as an external event. This can be really hard to understand, but when you really think about the fact that you're alive right now and that you were born into this world with like a blank canvas, and then you look at this canvas, right, and it's filled with, for example, my canvas used to say that I didn't think I was good enough, or I need to react when something doesn't go my way, or people are always judging me, or I have to always assume the worst because bad things are going to happen, or it's no way that I can have successful things happen to me, right? So we think that those ideas exist in the world. We think that, and this is something I'm really starting to wrap my head around, like, we think that life is inherently hard. We think that there's such thing as something being inherent to life. But nothing is inherent in life beyond your mind and the way you perceive the world.
So yeah, just to give an example to further explain what Sophie means. So we were driving yesterday. Drivers in Austin are crazy, very aggressive. And you said something of like, oh, what's wrong with them? Because they like honked at us and flipped us off. And it's really just that, because you can imagine when you're driving and you get stuck in traffic, it's super easy to be like, oh, I'm going to be late, and then I'm going to get fired, and then I'm going to do this and do that. And it's so easy to take that and to project it onto something else. And I think that's an example for what we do in our day-to-day life when we wake up, when we go to the lunchroom to make lunch, or whatever it is. I think that's an extreme example of projection, of perceiving how something might be. But really, it's just not how it is. It's just how you're perceiving it and how you're choosing to perceive it based off of how you're feeling, what's happened to you, and so on.
What's a lunchroom?
I don't know. I have the most random thoughts come up whenever we do these things. I'm trying to like be applicable. Like,
these things, these episodes.
We're like, this is like a teacher podcast or something. I don't know why I said a lunchroom.
And so why does this matter, right? Like, why does it matter that entire way that you perceive reality is a subset of your experiences? Well, this matters because I think a lot of people probably listening to this podcast want to change, want to evolve, to create their own reality, to have life work out the way they want it. Whether you want to start a business, or whether you want to just feel a little happier at your current job, or just feel a little more content in your relationship. The first step to changing your reality is to have that desire to change. And I was looking back at some old journal entries from like 2 years ago. And this, I think, is really the benefit of journaling, is you can really see yourself reflecting. And this is like 2021. And I was just really starting to question. I was like, I don't really understand why I keep getting so frustrated by things. I don't really understand why I only feel happy on the weekend. I don't understand why I feel so anxious. So starting to question those habitual thought patterns.
Right, which was leading me to what I was thinking about was the mental chatter that we all constantly have. It's like, 1, realizing you want to change. 2, becoming aware of the mental chatter that you're having. And there could be multiple levels of becoming aware of the mental chatter, because right now I'm having mental chatter of, what are you doing in this podcast episode? Is this different than last week's podcast episode? Are listeners going to think that this is not consistent with what they want? Is one emotional? Is one philosophical? What? I'm like trying to silence that and be like, I'm just here now having this conversation. I don't know where it's going to go. The premise of our podcast really is just showing up and seeing where the conversation goes and allowing our subconscious to tap in. So I just think that it's really interesting because you can just become more and more and more and more aware of your mental chatter. It never ends, because it's constant.
So the example you just give, though, on this podcast, we're sitting here talking and you have what Michael Singer calls, and a lot of people just refer to as the voice in your head being like analyzing what's going on. So to a person who has not done any of this work, they're going to hear that voice in their head and they're going to go, oh, let me stop doing what I'm doing. Let me completely change all this, because you're giving so much weight to the chatter. You're giving so much weight to that voice in your head.
Right. And it's crazy. And I think I've really taken a lot from reading Michael Singer's Surrender Experiment, because he constantly has things surface. His mental chatter says, no, hard stop, don't do that. But he just silences it and moves on anyway. And I think that if we constantly listen to our mental chatter, we're never going to be satisfied, because no matter where we are, no matter what we're doing, it's always going to have something to say or do. So it's like, what's the point? And I think I've started to learn that with this podcast, especially. It's nonstop. And I think especially with consumerism, like consumerism is really built on the mind chatter of, oh, but I need that, but I need that, but I need that, but I need that. And You just don't. You simply don't. Your mind is programmed by what you put into it. So if you're putting into it that you need all of these things, that you're around people who have all of these things, then that's what you're going to get out of it. And your mind chatter, it goes deep too. It's like deeply immersed in your insecurities too. And I think it's learning to say, hey, I actually probably don't know what's best here. I have this experience in front of me. I'm just going to move through with it without listening to this mental chatter.
Yeah. And I think that's also kind of how you start to get to the point where you can comprehend the fact that you're not your thoughts. Because it's like, okay, so Daisy, if you can sit here right now and tell me that your thoughts are commenting on the podcast and you're judging it, whatever. So who is commenting on that? So who is, okay, let's take a step back here. Who is Daisy that is commenting on that? Well, how would you explain the person that is aware of those thoughts? Is that you? Because how would you describe who you are in that sense? Well, in a metaphysical, philosophical sense.
Yeah. So I start to think of it like this. I think about it as there is this one existence. There's this one reality that we're all experiencing. It's all the same thing. But for some reason, I'm perceiving things maybe differently than you are, or differently than our neighbor, or differently than the person walking to the car out there past the window. So if what's greater than us is that we're all this one reality, then why would I listen to these thoughts? Because I'm the only one experiencing these unique thoughts. Why would I think that they are possibly more important than what's actually happening in reality? Because reality is literally experiencing everything, and these thoughts get in the way of us experiencing reality. So to answer your question, I don't think there is any difference between you and I. I think we're both experiencing all of this, but we have different mental chatters. I think that's truly the only difference. So I think that gives me the utmost reason to not listen to these mental chatters, because they're just further taking me out of this actual reality that we're all experiencing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. And I think also the point is...
But
no, not a but more so like, so then if you can be aware of those thoughts, then you must be the observer. So that must then go to show that those thoughts are not you. If you can sit here and tell me that these thoughts are coming up, right? So do you think there's a point?
Right.
Okay, but do you think there's a point in your life where you wouldn't have been able to actually communicate to me that those thoughts are coming up? Or
absolutely. There would be the chatter in my voice saying like, this is ridiculous. I'm resisting this because this is so stupid. How do you know that that's true?
So do you think the fact that you can even communicate that to me demonstrates that you have gained a level of awareness that you're not your thoughts?
Yeah, because I'm letting go of the control the thoughts have over me.
Right. It was so interesting. Like I woke up this morning and I was just like, I just feel discontent right now. And in the past, I think I would have taken that thought at face value and been like, I feel discontent. Why? Why do I feel discontent? Like, oh, so something must actually be wrong. Like, I don't know. But this morning I was like, hold up. Nothing's wrong here. Like, I actually feel pretty good. I'm waking up. The sun's shining. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon. I had a great weekend so far. Okay. But I have this feeling in my body that's telling me that things just don't feel good right now. Okay. So what do you do in that situation, right? It's like, and I was drawing in my journal today. It was kind of like me pulling a wagon, and the wagon was kind of my mind. And it was like kind of like the visual of like, I'm always a few steps ahead of my mind. Like I, meaning the observer, is always a few steps ahead of like my mind, which is just so heavy and it's taking so long to get to where I am. Why? Because it has 30 years of programmed material in there, right? So if I can wake up this morning, not feel so good, but understand that, oh, right, that isn't true. I don't even need to sit here and try to understand it. I just need to know that that is not true. Things are fine. But what happens and why it's really hard is because like he's talking about in the book, like that desire to want to change has to be, let's just say that your thoughts are like taking up 50% of your mind, then your desire to change has to be 100% more. You have to have a much stronger desire to change than the percentage of the thoughts that are weighing you down. So if like that voice is really loud, your desire has to be much louder than that. Is that making sense?
Yeah. And I think that can sound really intimidating to be like, well, how is that possible? I can't do that. I think it's just not listening to that thought. I think it's surrendering to those thoughts and moving forward. It's not a matter of like, how much can I mentally think myself through this? It's a matter of how do I emotionally, spiritually feel? Like what's the, like, energy inside of me, like how is that bustling? Like, do I have a desire to sustain this? Not push through all at once, put all my energy towards it. That's not how change happens. It's a sustained amount of energy, of persistence, that realizing that you may get caught back up in it and say, oh, this controls me. These extreme thoughts control me. And then coming out of it and saying, right, they don't. And then lasting a good while without that mental chatter, then it coming back. I think it has to be a long-term commitment without the need to see results right away. It's more about focusing on the change, and that can be hard because focusing on the change means you're focusing on the discomfort, because change is uncomfortable. But if you are uncomfortable, it's always a good thing. It's always a good thing. Even if you don't think it is, that's just your mental chatter telling you that.
Well, like Joe Dispenza, he's like, when you're uncomfortable, you're forming new pathways in your brain. So
like, how cool is that?
Right.
How reaffirming that you can change is that you are uncomfortable.
Right. So when you're uncomfortable, that means you are changing.
So that is such a positive reinforcement that discomfort isn't bad. It means that you're changing your neural pathways, and in the future, you're going to be able to not get upset. And I'll give an example about this. I've been really focusing on this because I'm super sensitive to noise, or I have been sensitive to noise, and my nervous system gets wrecked. It has gotten wrecked when I hear a lot of noises. And today I've been really focusing on saying, I'm safe. This is okay. Nothing is wrong for this noise. And this morning I started hearing a lot of noises, and I was like, I don't feel anything. I just feel normal. I just feel like I'm not upset, or I'm not triggered, or I'm not overwhelmed. And it's subtle, small change where I might hear a loud noise later and my nervous system might get dysregulated, but I'll say, that's okay. And maybe in a month I'll hear that same noise and not feel anything. Like, that's change. It's subtle, slow progress.
And then Joe Dispenza, like,
can I say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
And this is why self-reflection is so important. And I've been noticing this a lot. And I think since we have been listening to Joe Dispenza, I have been just kind of waking up, sitting in silence for 15, 20 minutes in the mornings. And I think this clears so much space for you to make a decision that's going to further benefit you. And I keep finding that I keep going in a direction, instead of distraction, I go in a direction towards reflection, whether that's writing, whether that's walking without noise, without music or anything. I think reflection is so pivotal. I mean, that's what this podcast is ultimately, you know? So I think it's finding ways to reflect on a regular basis, because that's where you see, wow, I'm seeing a difference. I'm not on autopilot. It's cool. And that's life. That's real life.
And it also shows you that, like, you can literally change your life. Like, you can change your life. And how do you do that? You change your thoughts. How do you change your thoughts? You sit in the discomfort of recognizing, what are these habitual thoughts getting in my way? What are the things I'm thinking every single morning? And that's what you're saying. Reflecting on them, writing them down, meditating, sitting in silence, like taking that time to just not wake up in the morning and not get on your phone. Like, I've really made a habit, and anyone who's an iPhone user, there's a setting where you can kind of change the color of it so it turns to red mode. So if you want to use your phone in the morning, you're not getting as much blue light, or it doesn't, like, it's not as intense. Or like not checking social media till noon. Like, that's made a huge difference for me.
I didn't go on social media at all yesterday, and I still haven't gone on today.
It felt amazing. And
it's so great.
Yeah. It's too much. It's just so much input, honestly, because another thing, our brain is a machine. Like, our brain is an input machine. So if you're waking up for 5 days straight and you're listening to a certain podcast, or you're reading a certain book, or you're journaling, versus if you're waking up for those 5 days straight and you're going on social media and you're consuming that same content that's making you feel lack and making you feel insecure, at the end of that week, that state that you're in is going to be based on the accumulation of all those actions you've been taking. And that's kind of like what our life is. Like, what is your life? Your life is literally accumulation of actions that you've been taking in each present moment. How do you change your life? Well, you have to change what actions you're doing each day.
All right, Joe Jr. JD Jr. So I just thought of something, because when I was working a 9 to 5, I remember I would get up at 7 o'clock every day, except for the days I would sleep in, but you know, I would get up and I would be very stringent about my 2 hours before work started, before I had to sit down at a desk. And it would almost be like those 2 hours would be escapism, because I was so fearful and so frustrated that I didn't want to sit down at 9 o'clock to do my job, that I would just, like you said, listen to podcasts in the morning, go on walks, but like it wasn't in a sense that I was being in the present moment. It was as I was avoiding what was to come in the future. So I'm just thinking back to myself of what advice I would give back to myself who was in that position is I would say, accept that I know that I'm going to have to start working at 9 o'clock and don't try to run away by distracting myself. Sit in the discomfort of silence and know that I'm going to have to start working an hour and a half from now, but that's okay. And not trying to fill my thoughts and distract them and have a good time. Like they say, like the revenge scrolling at night, like when you like work so much, so you are at night on your phone, just like taking time back for yourself, doing something bad for yourself. I think it's easy to do that in the morning as well, where you can make it look like you're doing a productive routine, but really it's just an avoidance strategy from being present in the discomfort of knowing that you have a presentation coming up that you're scared of, or that you just don't like your job. So I think that sometimes just sitting in the discomfort and doing nothing is kind of the best thing that we can do, because we're not distracting then. We're actually sitting with our thoughts. And sometimes that's the most uncomfortable thing that we can do.
Why do you think we're able to show up this week with so much more energy and just so much more, honestly, like I just feel so like abundant. I feel so like here. And that's because the last 2 weeks have been absolute shit. Like literally, like I have cried so much the last 2 weeks. Stuff coming up from my parents 3 years ago, stuff coming up from just really deep stuff. And how do I find this level of clarity right now where I am moving forward is feeling those emotions. Like, so how do you feel the emotions? How do we access emotions that are so disconnected from us, that are so distant to where we are now? Is sitting in discomfort. Because think about it. And I've been noticing this for myself. We were in the car the other day dropping you to CVS, and normally when I'm waiting in the car, I'm going to open up my phone and just probably go on Instagram because I'm like, oh, here's 5 minutes to kill, whatever. You don't think it's that big of a deal because, oh, it's just 5 minutes. But think about how many times throughout the day, throughout the week, that you're spending those 5 minutes scrolling. So if you took those 5 minutes, right, at a time, 5 times 5, 35 minutes total for the week. Probably more than just 5 minutes you're spending doing that. That time that you'd have been spent trying to avoid just sitting with your thoughts, I guarantee you, I'm not trying to make any guarantees on this podcast, no promises, we're not experts, but I really, really strongly believe that time you would have just spent just sitting alone in silence would have led to some clarity, some level of insight. And that's exactly what's happened literally the past 3 years is I decided to stop avoiding all my thoughts and all my feelings. And that's how my life is now changing, like coming out of this like huge, I'm not even gonna call it a funk. It was just part of the process. But now coming back up for air and living in a new city, I do have the clarity to say that like I have changed my life. I have literally changed my life in so many different ways. So that means it's possible for you, whoever is listening to this podcast, that you also can do it. Because I am not any different than you. We both have the same brains. Maybe they're a little different, whatever. But from a biological level, we both have a brain, right? So the point is taking back that time to yourself, taking back, and not just to yourself in the way that, oh, I'm going to scroll for myself. No, like separating yourself from what that habitual mind wants to do and saying, I'm not going to do that thing that's going to give me comfort. I'm going to do the thing that's not going to give me comfort because I don't want to keep living in the same way I've been living.
Well, I think it's interesting because no matter what position you're in, that is what's meant to be happening, because there's always going to be something that you can learn from that. Because I think back to when I was 23 or 24 and I was in a tough place and how desperate I was to get out of that place. But sometimes it takes years of being in a place like that to finally recognize what you want to do and how to fix it. It doesn't mean just because you're in a place where you can't see doesn't mean that you're not actually doing work to get to the place that's going to give you clarity. I think that it's really easy to think that in order for us to be making progress, we have to feel really good. I think the truth is when we're making the most progress, we don't feel the best. We don't feel good. We're not always going to feel really good, but I think it's more important to feel like you're making progress.
And then like think about, so I don't drink. Daisy doesn't really drink, but I know she doesn't like to box herself and say she doesn't drink, but we both just don't really drink. And when I reflect on,
although we did go to a workshop the other night and Sophie, unbeknownst to her, entered it by posting a picture and tagging them, and she won a liter of vodka, which was, I thought, really funny.
I was like, we're going to bring that to that event we're going to next week. But changing the way, oh, by the way, that event that we went to, it was like a build your own brand workshop. We weren't going to go to it because we were like, oh, $60, kind of expensive. guess what? Our friend calls us up and was like, hey, I have these 2 tickets to the event. Do you want to go? Like, that's how our life keeps unfolding now. It's just like things just keep falling into our lap out of nowhere. And what do you think that's a reflection of? Our change in consciousness, our change in reality. But anyway, not to get too off tangent, there's no such thing as a tangent anyway. Honestly, when you say you're on a tangent, you're probably just judging yourself. But what I was going to say is like, just think about like how differently I spend my weekends now. I used to spend so much time on the weekends drinking from 2 p.m. to like 9 p.m. Oh, because that was the only thing I knew how to do. That's what all my friends were doing. Then you wake up, Monday comes, you're just all of a sudden you're so anxious and you never had that time to just sit and just be. And I'm just realizing the importance of just being. If you only have one weekend, one day on that weekend to yourself, letting go of the pressure to spend it any sort of way and like letting yourself just relax. Because I think like really for me, stop drinking and stop distracting myself by just avoiding. So I was so scared to sit alone in my apartment or just, I didn't even know at the time. But
so it's an interesting thing because I was actually thinking about this yesterday. So I'll take you back a little bit. We were at Whole Foods. It was a Saturday at like 3 o'clock. We were going, or maybe it was like 11 o'clock. I don't know. We were going to get stuff to make lunch. And I saw everyone in their cars. And coming from New York City, it's so interesting because I feel like it's so easy to be like, oh, there's everyone walking in New York. They're all out doing something really fun. I'm walking past bars and restaurants. They're all doing that. And in Austin, where everyone drives cars, it's like, oh, everyone can kind of hide in your cars. Things are spread out. You don't really know what you're doing. If you're at Whole Foods, you're with other people who are at Whole Foods. So you were like, oh, I'm not the only one who's spending my Saturday this way. All this be said, I think this like idea that I'm doing the wrong thing goes back to like being a freshman in college where again it's a very walkable campus area and you see everyone who's like having fun partying with all their friends and you're like, oh, but I'm alone and I'm going to get lunch by myself. And you start to be like, oh, so I can't enjoy myself because I'm insecure because I'm alone. And I feel like I carried that mentality sometimes into New York as I was making a shift of, you know, I don't want to go drink on a Saturday at 2 p.m. where I'm going to see everyone doing that. And, you know, it's easy to walk around and see people doing that, even when you're not doing that because it's in your neighborhood. So I quickly had to thought out that yesterday because it wasn't that I was insecure that I was spending my Saturday at Whole Foods. It was that I was like, wow, there's so many other people doing this as well. But I think it's just really easy to judge ourselves on how we spend our time if it's not how we think the mass majority is doing it. And I think I used to always give so much weight to like people who are cool and people who are drinking and people who are doing the scene and people who are doing all these things. And I was always like, well, it's lame if you're not doing that. And I think that was just so beat into my head from like high school and college and early adulthood in New York City that you are listening to going back to the mental chatter, you're listening to the mental chatter and you're letting it control you and stop you from actually enjoying spending your time how you actually just want to fucking enjoy your time.
It really makes you realize that like there was a point in life when we learned and our minds ingrained that we should constantly be comparing and measuring what we're doing to what other people are doing. And if it doesn't meet that standard, then it's not enough and it's not good enough. Like I used to feel so insecure for staying in on a Friday night when I was like 23. I was like, oh, everyone's out. And it's just like, until I had the recognition of like, oh wait, I am the only one who's actually experiencing this. So if I go out or if I don't go out, if I'm sitting at home eating pizza alone at 9 p.m. on a Friday versus going to the bar, I don't want to go to the bar or whatever, you almost think that like, it's hard to like explain it, but it's like you almost think that you don't realize that you're the only one experiencing it and that's up to you to be happy in both cases so that it doesn't matter if everyone else is doing it because at the end of the day, it's you. Do you get what I'm trying? Can you better explain what I'm trying to say?
I can. I think it comes down to security versus insecurity. And I think insecurity arises from the inability to face yourself because you're uncomfortable with yourself and the decisions that you're making that's not a part of the group. So what I mean by that is, for example, if say I was in New York City right now and it was a Saturday at 2 p.m., I would have no issue walking through the bars, past the bars, into the park to read a book, say whatever. Because I have sat with myself and I have looked at myself and I'm comfortable with these decisions I'm making because they're deeply connected to a sense of me. I don't know, of something greater than me. Like I think I've just like crossed that barrier. I've crossed that bridge because I have looked at myself and I've changed my values. I've changed what I value. And I think when say you're a 23-year-old and you're starting to change your values, but it's really hard because of the group pull, it's this and that, and you haven't really faced yourself, you haven't really looked at yourself, so you're uncomfortable sitting with yourself doing something that is different than what quote unquote everyone else values, because you're still not fully committing to facing yourself and sitting with yourself. Like, you're in that discomfort, you're feeling the discomfort actively because you're actively working through it. You're actively making a decision to change how you spend your Saturdays. And I think that's uncomfortable. Insecurities come up, and that's where you're like, this chatter doesn't have to control my life. I can do this. I can feel uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to make me regret my decisions.
Reflecting on all this is really making me remember like how hard early 20s were. Like, my early 20s were so hard, like trying to fit in so badly with everybody else around me. And like, I remember it's just like, you almost like, you don't really have that awareness to know that you don't have to keep doing what everyone else is doing. But like you're saying, like, when you stop running away from yourself, when you start finally facing yourself, you can actually then sit and do the thing you actually want to do and actually be there. Like, I had this realization the other day when we were in Whole Foods. I feel like I used to spend so much time like trying to be seen. Like, I wanted to walk around and I wanted people to look at me, or like I was always looking around. Like, I was never actually there. And recently I'm just focused on myself, kind of. I'm just focused on being when I'm in the activity that I'm doing, not needing anything to come out of it. So I think group interactions is a really, really interesting topic. I know we can wrap this up kind of soon because we have a lot to do today.
But I want to bring it back to like kind of changing your reality. I feel like that's a lot about what we talked about today, and how one of the key drivers of changing your reality is discomfort. You'll probably spend the majority of your time in discomfort as you're changing your reality. And I think that's a lot of your 20s. I mean, it can be at any age, truly, but I'm just speaking from past experience. And it's an okay thing to be in constant discomfort. I think a lot of the times, I've experienced this on multiple occasions, I would rather be sitting in discomfort because I know it's going to work out and be okay, than sitting in copious amounts of comfort. Because if you're sitting in discomfort, I feel like there's impending change that has to happen. Something has to roll out to change. But if you're sitting in copious amounts of comfort, nothing is guaranteed to change. It's more likely to be guaranteed to stay the same. So I don't know what scares you more, the idea and the prospect of not changing at all, or the prospect of things evolving and changing and growing into something you could never imagine. And there's always a price to be paid for either one that you choose. But I think it's going deep and asking yourself, what do I really want? What do I really value? And if I'm going to die, why wouldn't I pursue that despite the discomfort? Because discomfort's going to come at some point, and if you don't face it now, you're just going to be facing it when you have no time left.
And not to be discouraged, because your current reality right now just reflects where you're at. So that just reflects that there's still changes that you need to make within. So if where you're at right now is not where you want to be, and you feel so discouraged because you're like, well, my reality reflects all the possibilities. If I'm here right now, I'm at this job I don't want to be at, or I'm in this relationship, whatever it is. If you're looking at your current set of circumstances and thinking that those reflect what your life can be, you're not recognizing that that is just a reflection of who you are right now. So if you want to change your life, you have to change yourself. This is exactly, I think, what this episode is kind of about. It's just a reminder to you that you are in control of changing your life.
Yeah, and it all starts right now.
It starts right now. Mm-hmm. What are you going to do when you stop listening to this podcast episode? Are you going to go pick up TikTok and start scrolling? What are you going to do, right? Like,
yeah, all those little moments matter.
Maybe you pick up the journal and maybe you write 5 things that you are working on reprogramming your brain to unlearn. Maybe that's what you do after this. Maybe you go for a walk and really start to process things. I think it is the decisions that we make in every moment that shapes up our life. So having intention with that, and not just being a passerby in the driver's seat and letting your thoughts just drive you your whole life.
And let it just be a reminder that if you are faced with more discomfort, then you're taking the path of more resistance in that way, you know? So don't let it be discouraging whenever you face discomfort. Let that be a reminder that you're making change in your life and there is change to come. So hold it out until you see the difference.
And take it from us. Go listen to last week's episode where you hear Daisy going through extreme anxiety spiral, and look at her today.
Yeah.
Like, you have to go through that to get to, like, you're so much more clear than you were last week. Like, wow.
Yeah, nothing is consistent.
Nothing's permanent either.
Nothing is fixed.
Nothing's fixed. None of this.
No.
It's
a big roller coaster.
As soon as you can recognize this moment, well, it's gone. That's life, though. So, guys, honestly, I believe in you. I really do, because we're all on this journey together. There is no division. There is no separation. Daisy and I are not different than you. All we're doing is putting in the time, putting in the effort to really question and say, what life do I really want?
And this really started 3 years ago, if not more, you know?
So don't get discouraged. Keep going. Keep moving forward. Thank you so much for listening today. It was great to have you on today's episode. As always, please like, please review, please comment. Right now, Daisy, do your thing. Let everyone know.
So if you're listening to this podcast and you've reached it to this point, go to Spotify right now. Follow us. Follow.
Now.
Just do it. Just follow it. I saw we went up to 737. I'm excited to check that again. We were at 700 when I first started saying, go follow right now. But
there you go.
If you do anything after you do this podcast, if you enjoyed this, all we want you to do is go follow our podcast.
There you go. Don't be
you.
scared to ask for what you want. All right, guys. Thanks so much for listening. I want to talk to you next week.